Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we're celebrating what would have been the birthday of Ken Hensley, the leader in all but name of Uriah Heep. Now, why do I call him the leader? Well, he wrote the vast majority of songs, typically by himself and sometimes in collaboration with other members of the band. The other reason is because, much like Deep Purple with John Lord, Uriah Heep were very much a band where the Hammond organ was central to the sound. And one could make an argument that with Uriah Heep, it was even more central than in Deep Purple, because, well, Deep Purple was all about a back and forth between Ritchie Blackmore on guitar and John Lord on the organ. Uriah Heep was really an organ centered band, and Ken brought that sound to it. And the other reason is that they were one of the best harmonizing heavy rock bands around. If there's one identifiable thing about Uriah Heep above every other hard rock band at that era, it was their extraordinary harmonies, and Ken was a huge part of that harmonizing, of course, with Dave Byron. All the guys got into the action, and the core of that band from the very beginning was Ken, David Byron on vocals, and Mick Box on guitar. Now, Mick continues to go strong, and he's had other very successful lineups of the band, but I think most people would agree that the golden age was when Ken was writing the songs, playing the organ, doing the harmony vocals, and for much of that time, the most well-known lead singer was, of course, David Byron. Now, Ken went on to record with a lot of other artists, and he even did a show in, I think it was the 90s or the early 2000s, with John Wetton, who was for a while in Uriah Heep. That was really good. He never lost that sound, never lost that tone, never lost that magic. And even a few years before his death, briefly reunited with the Mick Box-led Uriah Heep in Moscow. Because this is the thing about Uriah Heep. Their fame was always somewhat illusory in their native England. They had some hits and sold some albums in the US in the early and mid 70s, but where they ended up really building a legacy was in Russia and Eastern Europe. They were and remain very huge. They were, by most accounts, the first heavy rock band to play live in the Soviet Union. That show was filmed in 1985, and while that was a few years after Ken had left the band, the vast majority of the songs they were playing were the songs that were written by Ken. So again, his legacy lives on even there. And I've often asked myself, why is it that in Russia and in Eastern European countries, whether Hungary or Poland, you really meet so many hardcore Uriah Heep fans? And it's really hard to say. Marketing obviously was something very different in those countries. When you have a communist regime, as they did through the majority of Uriah Heep's lifespan, you don't really have record labels pushing things. You either had semi-official things that got licensed legally or quasi-legally to a label in a communist country. It would have been Melodia in the Soviet Union, or the stuff would have been snuck in through people who had visited other countries like West Germany and brought the records in. But one way or another, that's a Uriah Heep song, the stuff really ended up becoming big in those parts of the world. And it still is to this day. And I really think that that's one of the reasons that you cannot separate Ken Hensley's legacy from the legacy of the band that he helped to form. Listen to the epic, like an epic piece like Salisbury from the album of that name, or the shorter, punchier songs that they would then do on almost every album after that. They really didn't put out a bad album. Everyone has their favorite, but they were really a high quality band, and they definitely have their fans everywhere in the world, but they really ought to be remembered alongside your Purples and your Sabbaths and your Zeppelins as being a really important band in the history of making rock harder and heavier and maybe even humbler. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.